I never expected the happiest day of my daughter's life to turn into the hardest day of my own life, as she stood on the graduation stage smiling at everyone around her, and then said my stepdad bought me a car. My real dad never did. The room froze, the applause stopped, and I felt a sharp ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore. It was like every year I spent supporting her, loving her, protecting her was erased in a single sentence. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, judging me, without even knowing the truth. And in that moment I realized that life had thrown me into a storm I wasn't prepared for, and yet I couldn't look away from my daughter. I couldn't hate her words, because they came from a place of excitement and hope. I had to hold my emotions together, take a deep breath, and try to understand what she really meant. And as the noise of the celebration faded around me, I noticed something on the corner of the room, a small envelope tucked under a pile of papers, something I had hidden years ago, that contained messages and memories that could change everything I knew about her father, and maybe even the way she saw me. And as I slowly walked over to it, my heart pounded with anticipation and fear, because I knew that inside that envelope there was a truth waiting to be revealed, a truth that could heal or break us all. The moment my daughter said those words, I felt a wave of pain rage through me like a storm. I had spent years being there for her from the first day I held her in my arms, to every late night, helping with homework, every scraped knee, every tear shed, every word of encouragement, every moment I stayed awake worrying about her future. I thought I had done enough. I thought my love was visible to her and everyone around me. But suddenly, in that crowded room, it felt invisible, worthless, as if every effort, every sacrifice had been meaningless, and I could hear the whispers and see the stunned faces of friends, family, and even strangers who had come to celebrate her achievement, their eyes filled with curiosity, pity, and judgment, and my mind raced, trying to understand how it could be that someone I had given everything to could praise another man in front of everyone for something material, a car that I never gave her. But what about all the emotional cars I had tried to offer, all the time I had devoted to being present, all the love I had poured into her life? Did none of it matter? In that instant I felt betrayed and ashamed, not by her words, but by the situation that had been built over years, by absence, by neglect, by choices made long before I had even met her. I thought about the small gestures, the missed birthdays, the half-hearted apologies, the promises never kept by her real father, and how they contrasted with the excitement and pride she showed for her stepdad, and it was unbearable to watch as she laughed with joy, and yet inside me I was breaking. My heart was heavy with grief and anger and confusion. I wanted to scream, tell everyone the story that had been silenced by time, but I couldn't. I had to keep my composure, and yet every inch of me wanted to run from the room, escape the judgment and the humiliation. But I stayed rooted in place, my eyes fixed on her, trying to remind myself that this was still my daughter, the same little girl who had clung to me in the dark nights, the same girl who had looked at me for comfort and love. And I knew I had to find a way to understand what was happening, find a way to make sense of the hurt, and find a way to protect her from disappointment and from a world that so often values material things over love and presence. And as I stood there frozen for a moment, I noticed the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about the car, the way she beamed with pride, and I realized that she was innocent of malice. She only saw love in tangible forms, and I had to reconcile my pain with her joy. I had to navigate my own emotions and at the same time support her happiness, because that was what being a parent truly meant. Even if it hurt me more than anything, I had to hold her hand and let her feel loved in her way, while I silently began to question myself, to question every moment of the past, to question every decision I had made to protect her and nurture her. And I knew that to survive this moment and to prepare for what came next, I had to confront the memories of absence, the shadows of past failures, the lingering pain of neglect, and yet find hope in the possibility that the truth behind the words she had spoken might reveal a path to healing, a hidden message, a secret I had kept that could finally explain the complexity of our lives and allow both of us to move forward in a world that had always felt unfair, but also full of potential for reconciliation and love. As the noise of the graduation faded and people began to congratulate my daughter, I noticed a small envelope peeking out from under a stack of papers on the corner of the room. It was an envelope I had hidden years ago, containing letters, receipts, and photos that I thought no one would ever see, a part of my past carefully tucked away. Yet now its presence felt like a beacon calling me to uncover the truth, and as I reached for it, my hand trembled, my heart pounded, and I felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and curiosity, because inside that envelope were memories I had hoped to protect, memories that held explanations for every absence, every unkept promise, every moment of silence from her real father. I sat down quietly away from the crowd and gently picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of years in my hands. The paper crinkled softly, and I realized that what was inside could change the way my daughter saw her life, could challenge her assumptions, and even challenge my own. understanding of what had really happened over the years, and as I carefully opened it, I found a series of letters, each one meticulously dated messages that revealed struggles, financial hardships, personal mistakes, and heartfelt confessions from her father, a voice I had never truly heard because it was always hidden behind absence and neglect. The letters spoke of guilt, regret, and a desire to be better, a longing to connect with his daughter, even though he had failed in countless ways. I also found receipts showing small gestures he had tried to make that went unnoticed, hidden photographs of moments he had observed from a distance, wanting to be there but never quite succeeding. And in that instant, the weight of confusion and pain that had been pressing on me began to shift slightly. I realized that there was more to this story than what my daughter had announced, more than what the world had seen in her words, more than the simple contrast between a car and a lifetime of presence. And yet the most important piece remained. I still had to decide how to bring this mystery into the light, how to show my daughter the truth in a way that made sense without destroying her joy, without shattering her celebration. And as I held the envelope close, I knew that uncovering its secrets was the key to understanding the real story, the story that had been buried under years of misunderstanding and silence, a story that would soon change the course of our relationship forever. And as I looked back up at the celebration fading in the distance, I felt a mixture of dread and hope, knowing that whatever was revealed would not just be about material gifts, but about love, regret, sacrifice, and the fragile human heart. I remember the early days when my daughter was just a little girl, barely old enough to understand the world around her. She would cling to my arms with wide, innocent eyes full of wonder and trust, and I promised myself that I would always be there for her, that I would protect her from hurt, that I would give her everything she needed, even if it meant sacrificing my own comfort, my own dreams. And every day, I tried to keep that promise. I remember the first birthday when her real father forgot to show up. The cake sat on the table untouched, and I held her in my arms, trying to explain why someone who should have been there was not present, and I felt her little fist squeeze mine, as if she could understand the disappointment, but not feel it fully, and I watched her face light up with small joys from the little things. I tried to create the first recital when she practiced for weeks, and I spent every night helping her rehearse her lines, cheering her on from the front row, only to notice the empty seat where her father should have been, her little heart searching for recognition that never came. And the first day of school, when she looked at me with a mix of excitement and anxiety and asked if her dad would be there to see her take her first steps into the world, I had to gently tell her no and hold back tears, because I knew that absence would become a pattern in her life, and I tried to fill it with my presence, with love, with laughter, with moments that would make up for the emptiness she felt. And yet, even as I gave my all, there were subtle signs of longing in her eyes, longing for someone she barely knew, for a father she had barely seen, for approval that was always just out of reach. I remember the small gestures that went unnoticed, the notes he never sent, the calls he never made, the promises that dissolved into thin air, and I tried to explain it to her in ways she could understand, ways that would not make her resentful, that would not taint her young heart with bitterness. And as the years went by, I noticed how the absences added up, how each missed birthday, each canceled trip, each forgotten recital formed a silent pattern of disappointment that she carried with her even as she grew older. I remember the first time she talked about her stepdad with excitement, how she would mention gifts he had given, how he would take her to places I could not always afford, and the sparkle in her eyes contrasted sharply with the quiet disappointment I had tried to shield her from. And yet I never wanted to resent him. I never wanted her to feel that she had to choose between love and gratitude. I only wanted her to understand that love came in many forms, some tangible, some invisible. And as I sat through parent-teacher meetings, school events, and family gatherings, I realized that I had to find ways to be present in ways that mattered, in ways that would stay with her long after the gifts and celebrations were gone. I remember nights when she cried herself to sleep talking about things I could not fix, about feelings I could not erase, and I held her close, whispering that she was loved, that she was safe, that even when others failed her, I would always be there. And I remember the quiet mornings when we would sit together and talk about her dreams, about the world she wanted to explore, about the person she wanted to become, and I realized that those moments were the true gifts, the ones that could not be measured by material things, but by the depth of connection and the warmth of a heart that truly cares. I remember the first time she expressed disappointment over a gift, a forgotten birthday, a missed promise, and the way her eyes would glisten with confusion and sadness. And I tried to explain that people are imperfect, that sometimes even those who love you the most make mistakes. And yet, even as I spoke those words, I felt the sting of injustice, the sense that the world was unfair and that I could not protect her from every heartbreak, from every sense of absence that she would inevitably encounter, and I also remembered the moments when her real father would attempt small gestures, when he would show up unexpectedly, when he would leave notes or send gifts late, and the mixture of joy and disappointment that washed over her face as she tried to reconcile the intention with the reality, the hope with the pain, the love with the absence. And I realized that these early years were shaping the way she would see the world, the way she would perceive love, the way she would understand loyalty and trust. And I knew that my role was not just to be present to give gifts or comfort, but to teach her to navigate the complexities of human emotion, to understand that love is not always perfect, and that even in the presence of disappointment there can be forgiveness and compassion. And as the years passed, and she grew into a young teenager, I saw how these early experiences manifested in her relationships with others, how she sought validation in certain places, how she treasured small acts of kindness, how she valued presence and attention perhaps more than material things. And yet the contrast between her stepdad and her real father became more apparent with every passing year. I noticed the subtle comparisons, the admiration for the one who gave tangible gifts, the longing for recognition from the one who had failed to show up, and the internal struggle she carried between love and expectation, between gratitude and disappointment. And I spent countless nights reflecting on these dynamics, wondering if I had done enough, if I had been enough, if my love could ever fill the gaps left by absence. And yet amidst all this reflection, there were moments of beauty, moments of pure connection, when her laughter would fill the room, when she would confide in me, when she would rest her head on my shoulder, and I felt the profound depth of what it meant to be a parent, to witness the growth of a child, to navigate the triumphs and failures of human relationships, and to hold hope that despite the imperfections, despite the disappointments, despite the moments of hurt, there was a chance for understanding, for reconciliation, for love to prevail. And as I sat there thinking about all these memories, I realized that every step of our journey had been leading to this very moment, the graduation, the announcement, the envelope, the confrontation that was yet to come, and that understanding the past was the only way to prepare for the future, the only way to face the truths hidden in that small, mysterious envelope, and the only way to help my daughter understand that love is more complex than appearances, than gifts, than simple gestures, and that it is possible to honor all the emotions she felt while guiding her toward forgiveness and clarity. As the years went by, the tension between what my daughter received from her stepdad and what she never received from her real father began to accumulate in subtle ways, in daily conversations, in the way she would light up talking about outings or gifts, or the way she would mention him in passing with a pride that I could not compete with. And I felt the weight of comparison pressing down on me heavier with every passing birthday, every holiday, every milestone that arrived with excitement from one father and absence from another. I remember the moment she got her first smartphone, a gift from her stepdad, and the look of amazement and gratitude on her face contrasted sharply with the small pang of hurt I felt, because I knew that the thought and care I had put into past surprises had gone unnoticed or underappreciated. And yet I could not begrudge her joy. She deserved to feel celebrated, to feel special, and I tried to remind myself that my role was to support her happiness, even when it cut deep inside me. I remember school events where she would rush to show her stepdad something she had made or an achievement she had earned, and the way she would beam with pride waiting for his reaction, and how I would watch silently, holding my own emotions in check, knowing that if I spoke it might diminish her joy or draw attention to the absence of recognition from someone who should have been there throughout her life. And the tension escalated when friends and relatives would comment on the generosity of her stepdad, comparing him to her real father, and the subtle judgment in their voices added to the weight I already carried. I felt defensive, protective, and helpless all at once, as if I were caught in a storm of circumstances I could not control. And yet I had to remain composed, to continue being the pillar of support for my daughter, the one who had been there through every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every sleepless night. And I watched her grow older into a teenager, navigating the complex emotions of adolescence, amplified by the presence of one father and the absence of another. And I noticed the questions in her eyes, the curiosity about fairness, the longing for balance. And I felt both pride and sorrow for the young woman she was becoming, trying to reconcile the love she felt for both men, the admiration for one and the resentment for the other. And the tension escalated further when she began to express desires for experiences she wanted to share with her stepdad that her real father could never provide: trips, gifts, opportunities that were tangible and immediate. And I knew that the disparity between them was shaping her expectations of love and attention. And I began to fear the moment when this contrast would come to a head, when words would be spoken that could not be taken back, and feelings would be hurt that could not be easily mended. I remember the nights when I would sit alone thinking about these dynamics, replaying conversations in my mind, analyzing the Small incidents that had accumulated over time, the forgotten calls, the empty seats, the lack of gestures, and I realized that these small absences formed a larger pattern, a story of neglect that had silently built tension over the years until it was ready to explode, and the awareness of this growing storm made every celebration, every milestone, every joyful moment bittersweet, because I knew that underneath the surface of smiles and laughter lay unresolved emotions, complex feelings that needed to be addressed, that demanded confrontation and understanding, and the tension escalated to the point where I could no longer remain passive. I knew that the graduation would be the moment when everything could come to light, when the accumulation of years of absence and presence would intersect, when the invisible weight of disappointment and expectation would finally need to be acknowledged and addressed. And as the day approached, I felt my heart tighten with anticipation and fear. I imagined her announcing to the crowd her excitement, her pride, and I imagined the silent judgments of the guests, their eyes searching for a story, their hearts ready to react. And I knew that I needed to be prepared to navigate this delicate balance between truth and emotion, between pride and disappointment, between love and judgment. And the escalation of tension was not just in the external world, it was inside me, inside her, inside the unseen connections and disconnections that had formed over years, inside the quiet longing for recognition, inside the human need to feel valued and loved. And I realized that this tension had been growing silently, building a narrative of absence versus presence, a story of comparisons, a story of longing and expectation that was now ready to reach its climax, a story that would soon demand resolution, and that the next moments of confrontation, revelation, and understanding would shape the way we saw each other, the way we understood love, the way we reconciled with the imperfections of life and human relationships. And as I stood before her on the day of her graduation, watching the pride in her eyes, the excitement on her lips, the sparkle in her smile, I could feel the tension building between the past and the present, between what had been given and what had been withheld, between love expressed and love unnoticed. And I knew that every heartbeat, every breath, every thought was leading us closer to the moment when the mystery I had kept hidden for years would finally reveal itself, when the contrast between absence and presence would be fully exposed, and when the truth would demand recognition from everyone involved. And I also knew that how I handled this moment would define not just the celebration of her achievements, but the narrative of our relationship for the years to come, and that the escalation of tension was not merely about gifts or appearances, but about understanding, about empathy, about navigating the complexities of human emotions, about the fragile balance between joy and pain, between pride and sorrow. And as the final moments approached, as the applause settled and the room grew quiet, I could feel the culmination of every past incident, every small disappointment, every unspoken word pressing down, ready to intersect with the revelation that was about to unfold. And I braced myself to face it with honesty, courage, and love. As the applause of the graduation faded and I held the envelope close to my chest, I felt my hands trembling with anticipation and fear, knowing that inside lay the truth, the pieces of a story that had been hidden for years, a story that could finally explain the absences, the disappointments, the contrasts between the love my daughter received from her stepdad and the neglect she experienced from her real father. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letters one by one, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me, each page filled with handwriting that revealed struggles I had never fully understood, financial hardships, personal mistakes, regrets, heartfelt confessions, and a longing to connect with his daughter, even though he had failed repeatedly to show up in ways that mattered, tangible gestures that could have made a difference, but somehow never aligned with opportunity or circumstance. And as I read, I discovered receipts showing small acts of care and attention, gifts sent and gestures attempted that never reached her hands or went unnoticed, photographs capturing moments from afar where he watched her from a distance, wanting to be there, wanting to make an impact, wanting to prove his love in ways that life and circumstance had made impossible. And the letters spoke of guilt and shame, a voice that had been silent for so long, now pouring out in desperate honesty, admitting failures, acknowledging absence, asking for understanding and forgiveness. And I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me: relief that the truth was finally accessible, anger at the missed opportunities, sorrow for the years lost, and hope that perhaps this revelation could pave the way for reconciliation. And as I held the final letter, I realized that the mystery I had carried for so long, the small envelope tucked away, had been more than just papers and photographs. It was a bridge between the past and the present, a key to unlocking understanding for my daughter and for myself. And as I looked up at Her sitting in the crowd, unaware of what I held, I knew that the moment to reveal this truth was approaching. I had to prepare the words carefully, the timing precisely, the delivery with compassion and honesty, because the impact would be profound and irreversible. And as the room quieted and she smiled at her stepdad, I could see the admiration in her eyes, the pride, the gratitude, and I knew that the revelation had to acknowledge both the joy she felt and the complexities of human imperfection. I slowly approached her, taking a deep breath and feeling the tremor in my chest, knowing that every step I took was bringing us closer to the moment of clarity, the moment when the letters, the receipts, the photographs, the confessions would finally have a voice in our lives. And when I reached her, I spoke gently, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of years of emotion. I said, "There is something you need to see, something that explains why certain things happened, why some gestures were missed, why absence was felt." And I handed her the envelope. Her eyes widened with curiosity and concern as she took it, and I watched her carefully as she opened each letter, examining the handwriting, the photographs, the receipts, and I could see the realization dawn on her face, the mixture of surprise, understanding, confusion, and empathy, the recognition that her father had tried in ways she had never witnessed, ways that had failed to reach her yet were real attempts at love. And I saw her glancing at me for reassurance, and I nodded gently, letting her know that it was okay to feel whatever emotions arose in that moment. And as she read further, I could see the layers of emotion peel away, the pride for her stepdad remaining intact, the sorrow for the missed moments with her real father settling in the corners of her heart, the understanding that love can be imperfect yet meaningful, and the spark of hope that perhaps relationships could be mended. And as the minutes passed, the room seemed to shrink around us, the celebration fading into the background, replaced by a quiet, intimate revelation that only we could experience. And I realized that the dramatic turn had done more than explain. It had humanized it. It had made visible the struggles, the guilt, the desire to connect, the imperfections, the longings, all the unseen emotions that had been hidden in absence. And as I watched my daughter process this new information, I felt the burden of years lift slightly, the tension that had built over time starting to ease, a delicate balance being restored, a path toward reconciliation opening. And I knew that the next steps would be crucial: the confrontation, the conversations, the decisions about how to move forward, the repair of relationships that had been strained by absence and misunderstanding. And I also realized that this revelation was not just about understanding the past, it was about shaping the future. It was about creating an environment where love could be acknowledged, even if imperfect, where mistakes could be forgiven, and where relationships could grow despite human frailty. And as she folded the last letter and looked up at me, I saw tears glistening in her eyes, a mixture of emotions swirling within her, yet a sense of clarity settling slowly. And I knew that this dramatic turn had changed the trajectory of our story, forever setting the stage for the confrontation, the healing, the lessons about love and human imperfection that were about to follow. And I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the moment when words would be exchanged, hearts would be opened, and the culmination of years of tension would finally meet understanding and resolution. The moment had arrived, the graduation celebration still humming in the background, but for me the world had narrowed down to the space between my daughter and me. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to her, feeling the weight of years of absence, presence, love, regret, and expectation pressing down on every heartbeat, every breath, every step I took. I began to speak gently, my voice low, yet carrying the emotion I had held for so long. I said, "I know this has been hard for you, and I know you have felt the love of your stepdad in ways I have failed to show. And I want you to know that I have loved you every single day, even when my actions fell short." And I could see the confusion, the emotion, the mixture of anger and understanding in her eyes as she listened. And I continued. I handed her the envelope and said, "Inside are letters, photographs, receipts, confessions that explain why certain things happened, why some gestures never reached you, why absence was felt but love was real." And I watched as she took the envelope slowly, carefully unfolding each piece, examining the handwriting, the images, the proof of attempts at connection. And I saw the realization dawn on her face, the mixture of surprise, understanding, sorrow, and empathy. And I could feel the tension building between us, as if the years of unspoken words were compressing into this single moment. And I said to her, "Look at me. I want you to understand that love is complex, imperfect, but present in many ways." And I could see her eyes glisten with tears as she nodded, trying to process the flood of emotions, the pride for her stepdad still there, but now tempered with the understanding that her real father had tried in his own imperfect way. And then I turned my attention to the father himself, the man who had been absent for so long, whose choices had shaped so much of her experience. And I invited him to speak to her openly, to acknowledge his mistakes and express the intentions that had never been visible to her. And as he approached the Space between us, he took a deep breath and began to speak words laden with regret, remorse, and longing. He admitted the failures, the missed moments, the inability to be present in ways that mattered. Yet, he also expressed the deep desire to connect, to be part of her life, to make up for lost time, to show that love could exist despite imperfection. And I could see my daughter listening intently, trying to reconcile the joy she felt from her stepdad, the sorrow she carried for the absence of her real father, and the new understanding unfolding from the letters, the photographs, the receipts, the confessions. And I knew that the climax of our story was not about blame, punishment, or guilt. It was about recognition, understanding, empathy, and the willingness to navigate the complexities of human relationships, even when emotions run deep and conflicting. And I spoke again to her, reminding her that love comes in many forms, sometimes silent, sometimes visible, sometimes imperfect, and that she was surrounded by people who cared for her deeply, who wanted her happiness, and that acknowledging the shortcomings of one person did not diminish the presence of another. And I could see the weight on her shoulders begin to ease slightly. A tear rolled down her cheek, a small nod her way of embracing the messy, imperfect truth of her life. And I could feel the collective tension in the room shift, the silent anticipation of the guests, the family, friends, classmates, slowly giving way to understanding, compassion, recognition of human frailty, and the power of honest communication. And then she spoke, her voice shaking slightly with emotion, saying, "I understand now that love is complicated, that people try even when they fail, that I can feel love in many ways." And I watched as her words bridged the gap between the past and present, between expectation and understanding, between resentment and hope. And I knew that in this confrontation we had achieved something profound, not perfection, not a flawless resolution, but a human connection, real, raw, and transformative. And the father, who had been absent, looked at her with tears in his eyes, nodding, acknowledging the opportunity to rebuild, to be present in the way he had always wanted. And I held her hand, guiding her through the swirl of emotions, the pride, the sorrow, the confusion, the hope. And as the minutes passed, I saw the culmination of years of tension resolving, not in grand gestures, but in honest words. Tears held hands, and the recognition of effort, love, imperfection, and human frailty. And I realized that this climax was the turning point, the moment when the narrative of absence versus presence transformed into a story of understanding, empathy, and potential reconciliation, the moment when we confronted not just each other, but the mistakes, regrets, longings, and hopes that had silently shaped our lives. And as the room watched, quietly giving us the space to navigate this intense emotional terrain, I felt the first signs of relief, the first hints of peace, knowing that confrontation had brought clarity, that honesty had opened the door to healing, that love, even when imperfect, could prevail, and that the next steps, the consequences, the reflections, the lessons about forgiveness, understanding, and human connection would unfold from this pivotal moment. And as my daughter leaned into both of us, the room still buzzing softly in the background, I knew that the climax had not only been a confrontation, it had been a reconciliation of hearts, a merging of understanding, a human moment that would shape the way we saw each other for years to come. And I took a deep breath, holding her close, silently grateful for the opportunity to witness love, resilience, understanding, and the transformative power of facing truths with courage and compassion. After the confrontation, the graduation celebration resumed its rhythm around us. But for me and my daughter, the atmosphere had shifted subtly, yet profoundly. The revelation, the confrontation, had created ripples that extended far beyond that single moment, and I began to notice the first consequences unfolding, the way her eyes now reflected a deeper understanding, the way she carried herself with a sense of clarity and acceptance, the way she approached both her stepdad and her real father with a mixture of love, gratitude, and empathy. I realized that the confrontation had not erased the past, but it had allowed her to reinterpret it through the lens of understanding and compassion. I saw her speaking more openly with her real father, asking questions, expressing curiosity, and even offering forgiveness in ways that were genuine and heartfelt. And I could feel a subtle shift in the father, who had been absent. He seemed lighter, more present, more attentive, more willing to engage with the nuances of their relationship. And I understood that the confrontation had not only impacted my daughter, but had allowed the adult in the story to confront his own shortcomings, acknowledge them, and take active steps toward becoming the father he had longed to be. And I also noticed the consequences on myself, the relief that came from no longer carrying the silent weight of resentment, the freedom in finally allowing the truth to be known, the joy in seeing my daughter navigate the complexity of human emotion with grace and openness. And yet the consequences were not only positive, there was also a lingering sorrow for what had been lost, the moments that could never be reclaimed, the time wasted in absence, the opportunities that had slipped away, and I felt the ache of these losses keenly, but I also recognized that these consequences were necessary for growth, necessary for understanding, necessary for the possibility of reconciliation, and moving forward. I watched my daughter interact with her friends, family, and stepdad with a newfound depth of maturity. She laughed more freely, yet there was a subtle introspection in her eyes, as if she were processing the nuances of love, imperfection, and human relationships all at once, and I knew that the confrontation had planted seeds of empathy that would continue to grow long after the celebration ended. I also saw the effect on our extended family and friends, some of whom had been quietly critical of the dynamics between her stepdad and her real father now approached with curiosity and openness, seeking to understand the story behind the moments they had witnessed for years, and I realized that the consequences of honesty extend beyond the individuals directly involved. They ripple through the community, through the eyes of those observing, shaping perceptions, influencing judgments, and offering opportunities for others to reflect on their own experiences of love, loss, and understanding. I noticed my daughter hugging her real father longer than she ever had before, speaking with a tenderness and curiosity that surprised me, and I could see the subtle gestures of attention, the willingness to engage that had previously been absent beginning to surface. As he responded with care and attentiveness, I felt a sense of hope swelling inside me, knowing that this shift was the result of confrontation, of truth being spoken, and emotions being acknowledged. And yet I also held space for the complexity, the imperfections, the ongoing journey that this consequence implied, because reconciliation is not instantaneous. It is a process, a series of small, consistent steps over time, and I knew that the impact of this confrontation would be measured not only in the moments immediately following, but in the days, weeks, and months to come, in the ways they continued to communicate, connect, and understand one another. And I also reflected on my own role, the way I had held the space for understanding, the way I had navigated my own emotions, the way I had encourage honesty, empathy, and love even when it hurt deeply, and I realized that the consequences for me were a greater sense of clarity and purpose, the understanding that even in the midst of pain and disappointment, it is possible to foster connection, to model resilience, to create an environment where love, even when imperfect, can prevail. And as the celebration wound down and the guests began to leave, I noticed the quiet conversations between my daughter and her father, the tentative steps toward rebuilding their relationship, the laughter mingled with reflective pauses, the gestures of care and attention that had previously been absent, and I knew that these were the tangible consequences of our confrontation, the living proof that honesty, communication, and emotional courage can transform relationships, that it can bridge gaps created by absence, neglect, and misunderstanding. And I also observed the emotional growth in my daughter, the way she carried herself with a sense of maturity and understanding beyond her years, the way she could reconcile pride in one father with empathy for another, the way she could acknowledge imperfection and still embrace love fully. And I knew that these consequences would extend far beyond this single day, shaping her understanding of relationships, trust, love, and forgiveness for years to come. And I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the courage it had taken to confront the past, to reveal the truth, to embrace complexity, and to foster healing even amidst the pain. And I knew that the journey was far from over, that more conversations, more gestures, more opportunities to connect would continue to define the narrative of our relationship. But the consequences of this pivotal moment were undeniable, profound, transformative, and filled with the potential for lasting connection, love, and understanding. And as I held my daughter close, once more I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the confrontation had achieved what words alone could not. Had opened doors, had healed unseen wounds, had allowed love to be recognized, appreciated, and nurtured even amidst imperfection. And I knew that the story of that day would be remembered, not only for the revelation and confrontation, but for the tangible consequences that rippled through hearts, minds, and relationships, and that the true impact would continue to unfold in ways subtle and profound for years to come. As the graduation celebration wound down and the last of the guests departed, I sat with my daughter in quiet reflection, the room now silent except for the soft echoes of laughter and conversation that had passed, and I could see the transformation in her, the way her eyes carried both understanding and pride, the way her shoulders seemed lighter, as if a burden she had unknowingly carried had been lifted. And I realized that the events of the day were more than just a momentary confrontation. They were a catalyst for growth, understanding, empathy, and emotional clarity, and I spoke softly to her, my voice filled with both emotion and calm, and said, "You know, life is complicated. People make mistakes. Love is expressed in many ways, some visible, some invisible, and sometimes those we expect to be there fail in ways we cannot control." And she looked at me thoughtfully, her eyes glistening with tears, yet holding a sense of wisdom beyond her years. And I continued, "The lessons we learn in life are not always about fairness or material things. They are about recognizing effort, intention, understanding imperfection, and embracing love in all its forms." And as she nodded slowly, I could see the reflection of these truths settling in her mind, the subtle comprehension that relationships are nuanced, that human beings are imperfect, that love can coexist with disappointment, and that forgiveness is not weakness, but strength. And I realized that these reflections were as much for me as they were for her, the opportunity to pause, breathe, reflect, and understand the complexity of emotions, the necessity of honesty, empathy, and patience in navigating relationships, and the importance of allowing space for growth, understanding, and reconciliation, even amidst mistakes and absences. And I thought about the journey we had traversed, the early years of her childhood, filled with joy and disappointment, the small, unnoticed gestures, the absences, the celebrations, the tears, the laughter, the accumulation of tension, and the eventual revelation, confrontation, and consequences. And I understood that each of these moments had shaped us into the people we were in that very instant, and that reflection was essential to fully appreciate the depth of transformation that had occurred. And I spoke again, reminding her that our experiences, even the painful ones, are opportunities to learn, to grow, to understand ourselves and others, to embrace compassion and resilience. And I could see her processing these words, internalizing them, forming the foundation of wisdom that would guide her in future relationships and decisions. And I reflected on the notion that life is rarely simple or perfect, and yet within the imperfections, within the struggles, within the moments of misunderstanding, there exists the possibility of clarity, connection, and love, and that the reflections we make in these moments shape the way we move forward, the way we interact with others, and the way we perceive our own capacity for empathy, understanding, and forgiveness. And I reminded her that the story of this day would stay with her not as a tale of blame or judgment, but as a testament to the power of truth, honesty, courage, and love in all its forms. And I could see her eyes reflecting gratitude, a subtle acknowledgement of the journey she had navigated, the lessons learned, and the relationship strengthened. And I also reflected on the broader implications of our experience, the idea that every person carries unseen struggles that influence actions, choices, and perceptions, and that taking the time to understand those hidden layers allows for compassion, deeper connection, and meaningful reconciliation. And I realized that this reflective pause was necessary to consolidate the emotional journey of the day, to acknowledge the growth, the transformation, the shifts in understanding, and to prepare both of us for the continued journey ahead, the ongoing opportunity to nurture love, empathy, and connection in all relationships, present and future. And as the evening drew to a close, I held her hand and felt a profound sense of hope, knowing that the reflections we had shared would guide us in approaching life with greater awareness, patience, and appreciation for the complexities of human emotion. And I posed a gentle question to her, a question that would linger in her mind, inviting introspection and dialogue as she grew older. And I said, "How do you think we can carry forward the lessons of today into tomorrow?" And she looked thoughtful as she considered the idea of applying understanding, empathy, and forgiveness to every interaction, every relationship, every challenge she faced. And I realized that this reflective closing was not an ending, but a bridge, a moment to pause, absorb, and internalize the experiences and insights gained, to carry them forward with intention, awareness, and love. And as I watched her smile softly, a mixture of contentment, curiosity, and determination, I knew that the reflective closing had fulfilled its purpose to transform a moment of conflict and tension into one of understanding, learning, growth, and the quiet affirmation of love, imperfection, and human connection. As the evening settled and the quiet of the house embraced us, I turned to my daughter and smiled, knowing that the journey we had shared had brought understanding, reconciliation, and clarity. Yet before the story could fully close, I wanted to connect with everyone listening, reminding them that the lessons of today are relevant to all of us. And I spoke directly with warmth and sincerity. "I hope you enjoyed this story and felt the emotions, the tension, the revelations, and the lessons that unfolded. I invite you to take a moment to reflect on your own relationships, the moments of absence, presence, love, and imperfection that exist in your life, and think about how understanding, empathy, and honest communication could transform the connections that matter most. And if you found yourself moved by this story, if it touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can continue experiencing stories that explore human emotion, connection, and the Power of Truth. And I want you to know that there is another story waiting for you right now on the screen, a story filled with mystery, drama, and emotional depth that will keep you engaged just like this one. And I encourage you to click and continue this journey, because the more we explore these stories, the more we understand ourselves and the world around us. And as you watch that next story, remember that every moment of tension, every confrontation, every act of love and understanding carries lessons that can shape your perspective, inspire your actions, and enrich your relationships. And I want to thank you for being part of this experience, for taking the time to engage with this story and allowing yourself to feel every emotion along with us. And I hope that you carry the reflections of today into your own life, applying patience, empathy, forgiveness, and love in ways that make a difference for you and those around you. And as I close this final chapter, want to leave you with one thought: love is complex, imperfect, human, and transformative. Embrace it, cherish it, and never take for granted the connections that shape your life. And with that, I invite you to continue exploring. Watch the next story, subscribe to the channel, and join our community, where every story is an opportunity to reflect, grow, and connect.